Thank you very much, Luis. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I see some fear because the first arrows are not with people, but don't worry, I can reach you anyway. And it's always a pleasure to be here in my home. This is my university, the place where I was studying. So it's always a pleasure to be here again and to share with you, in this case, our experience. Because today we are going to try to think together about what is happening in the DSO world. Because plenty of things are happening today. In order to summarize all of them, we will talk about rules and technologies. In all these kind of aspects, I will try to give you a general overview about all these aspects surrounding the DSO business. And remember this word, DSO, because today we will say something about this, something that we believe, but we are not. We are not DSOs. Okay? So, first of all, let me give you a general overview of our company, because I'm coming from a group that is called Gas Natural Fenosa. Okay? And roughly we have some presence around the world in 30 countries with more than 20,000 employees. And with a quite huge amount of customers, more than 23 million customers. Our earnings are roughly 5,000 million euros with a total assets of 50,000 million. And the installed capacity in terms of generation is close to 51,500 megawatts. So we could say that we are the largest integrated gas and electricity company. These are all the countries we have presence around the world. And from now, let me change the word, because I'm coming from a group that is called Gas Natural Fenosa, but due to unbundling, I'm working for a company that is called Unión Fenosa Distribución. And in terms of electricity, and this is something we are going to talk about today, we have quite presence in the South American countries and also in Europe, in Moldova and Spain. Okay. Today I'm going to be really focused in the electricity part in terms of Europe. In order to understand our business from the Spanish perspective, roughly Unión Fenosa Distribución is covering 15% of the Spanish territory in two major areas, the northwest part and the central part. We are managing 3.7 million system users, okay, and 110,000 kilometers of lines, considering overhead lines and cables. And look at this, only 15% of the distribution business, if we compare this with the transmission national figures, is 2.5 or more times in terms of kilometers of line than the whole country. This is showing us a vision in terms of how dispersed is the distribution business. Okay? We have 2 control rooms in order to manage all this grid. One figure that is quite impressive, and this is going to open us the room in order for the discussion about the future of the DSO, is if we compare the peak demand, where it's close to 6,300 megawatts, we have an installed capacity of DG close to 3,500. So half of capacity is already installed in our grids. And this is changing in a huge, dramatically way the concepts and the paradigm that we are going to talk today. Okay, something to put into consideration. So, in order to understand this, do you know what is this? Can you assume what kind of concept is this?
It's a blackout.
That's a blackout. Okay. This is something related to that. This is a night vision of the Earth 200 years ago. Okay? So in other words, nothing in terms of electricity. And this is today. So something is happening very quickly. in our world in terms of electricity. We are in the area of electricity. I think we cannot imagine today our lives without electricity. And power is power, finally. Look at this, that's incredible. The population of the New York City is comparable in terms of energy to the whole population of the area of sub-Saharan in Africa. So 2.5% of the population of all the North Africa is consuming the same amount of energy. Power is power, definitely. Something very important to consider. And the electricity system is the most complex system ever created. You have to consider that no surplus is possible in our business. We have to generate the same amount of consumption that is required in real time. There is no way to do it in another perspective. And in terms of distribution, in Europe, that means 20 million kilometers is 13 times to the moon and back. That's an incredible system. So, let me try to start in order to, let's say some words about the role of the DSO. Because generally speaking, what are we doing? We are keeping the lights on. And, very important, as all the companies should do, things about customers. Customers are all the system users connected to our networks. Okay? So basically, remember I said we are DSOs? I'm sorry, we are not DSOs. Why? Because today, all of our incentives are based on we are managing networks, not systems. And our two main missions are related to we are market facilitators and we are system operators. Let's try to understand what are we saying when we are dividing these two missions. In terms of market facilitation, we have to allow connection and access in a non-discriminatory and transparent way for all our system users. That's very important, to access them to the markets. We are in charge somehow the well functioning of switching procedures. We have to enable the metering information for the settlement process. And data protection and privacy is more and more important today. And look at this. Because typically speaking, when we are talking about TSO, everybody is saying TSO is the wholesale market facilitator. And DSO is the retailer market facilitator. That's not exactly true. From a wholesale perspective, wholesale market perspective, today in Spain, 40% of the offer, 40% of generation is already connected to distribution systems. And more than 50% of demand is already connected within the distribution systems. So DSO is an extremely important agent for wholesale market facilitation. And this is something to consider because these figures are going to become more and more in terms of this kind of representation. And of course, in terms of retail, we are an extremely part of the retail market facilitation because 99% of the demand is connected to our networks. So DSO today is a wholesale and retail market facilitator. Very important to understand this. So in order to do that, there are some examples, and very good examples from everywhere in Europe. For example, we have this from Netz Leipzig. And thanks to the new web app services, for example, in this German company, we are delivering in real time the interruptions the customers are having in the networks. So we are able to say in real time what are the different scheduling works and what is happening in terms of blackouts. That's a good approach. Somehow this is extremely very well related with the ICT applied to MV and LV networks. And also, our company is one of the first ones in Europe in order to deliver the information from the smart meters from one day to another in terms of the hourly consumption based on the telemetry. That's very important because the system users are really confused about prices, the signals, and where they paying. Look at this example. The diversity in Europe is extremely huge because somehow we are paying the energy policy, in other words, tax and levies, the energy, and the networks, so variable and fixed cost. And in general, across Europe, it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But for example, in Spain, the energy policy is today 50% of what we are paying. So we have to improve that. And we have to couple, because today is the couple, the prices that are coming from the wholesale into the retail markets. The system users needs to know clear, transparent signals in terms of the energy world, and not in terms of the energy policy. Very important to consider. And the European Commission is extremely worried about this. They are trying to empowering the consumer perspective, for example, in terms of R&D for web services, appliances, smart grids. Also, the interconnection of the markets with more TSO interconnections. And also, a more active participation from distributed energy sources. This is something we will talk about today. In terms of system operation, what are we doing? We have to control and supervise everything that is happening in the grid. That means to supervise all the variables, all the parameters within the security standards, and also the KPIs in terms of quality in medium and low voltage. And we have to make sure that we are managing the outages in the grid, scheduling and not scheduling, losses, very important losses, and the new assets. But today we are not going to talk about everything. We are not going to say nothing about the new assets in terms of what we are investing. We are going to concentrate in the medium and short-term system operation perspective because it's the step forward is needed. The diversity is incredible. It's really huge across Europe. Why? The number of companies, the number of distributed power, the number of the voltage levels we are operating. We will see today that differences should be considered because one size fits not all approach should remain. And the European Commission is taking on board that. So, that's what we are doing today. Don't you think it's really funny what we are doing? Because demand is the leader. What does it mean? That means that generation and networks are following demand in all time scales. And today we are going to see what are the effects that we have due to the oncoming challenges. And in order to say this with some technical graphs, this is the typical low duration curve for Madrid in our company. And let me say here that only 11% of the time we are using the full capacity of our networks. Do you think this is efficient? In combination with this BAU approach, business as usual approach, we are running our networks from a passive network perspective. And you would say, what is that? Passive network is a network with unidirectional flows from transmission to final customers, final system users, and thanks to these unidirectional flows, it's very easy to analyze our networks. Why? Because they are really predictable. And thanks to they are really predictable, we are okay with a low level of monitoring and control of these networks. And thanks to that, we are able to apply the feed and forget approach. And that means that all the solutions that we are applying to our networks are taken at the planning stage. So 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ahead, real time, we are able to decide what are we going to do in our networks because they are really predictable. But ladies and gentlemen, these hypotheses are no longer true. Why? Because today we have distributed generation. In the future, demand response, storage, electric vehicle, more active approach from distributed resources is coming. So the paradigm is going to change dramatically. Somehow, today, distributed generation is displacing networks and generation in terms of energy, but not in terms of power. So we are connecting DG, but we are not integrating DG into the system because our networks are behaving today as systems. The best way in order to show you this is with figures. Look at this. In Spain, the total amount in terms of capacity, generation capacity installed in our country is 100,000 megawatts, roughly, in order to supply a peak of 35, 36, 40, depending on the year. So we have a double capacity today compared with the demand we had 10 years ago for the same demand, double capacity. Is that efficient? Of course, this is something that is required. Why? Because there is no firmness in the production from all technologies that are producing in terms of intermittency. For example, the wind power was very productive this year because 34 was dedicated in order to supply the peak, but in terms of photovoltaics, for this 4-5% installed, we were only using 0.5%. But of course, this could change every day because of this intermittency. But also, we have to consider local areas, because in Galicia, for a peak of 1,800 megawatts, we have a capacity installed of 2,200. So we have several hours across the time where we are exporting generation from distribution networks. Look at this. In terms of energy for the year 2014, only 60% of the demand is being covered thanks to the flows from the transmission system. That's a quite huge, significant change. But in terms of power, and remember that networks are capacity driven, from our company perspective, we could see that when we have some hours with very low demand, very high generation, we could see a coverage of 40, 50, 60, up to 80%. But in some local areas, like in Galicia, this amount could be up to 160% in terms of the exporting. All these are data in order to analyze what we are going to say today. So, we have some places where we are not operating networks in terms of a passive perspective. Why? Because we have bidirectional flows in our networks, and due to this they are unpredictable. So we are going to need high monitoring, control and supervision in medium and low voltage. The fear and forget is not going to be valid. Not all the solutions should be taken at the planning stage. We have to consider the operation stage. And we are not operating networks, we are operating systems. And we will see today systems of systems, because we are also operating communication systems, not only the electricity assets. So, what can we do? What are our key enablers, key facilitators in order to go for the next evolution, what is going to be required from the DSO growth perspective. Of course, regulatory framework, rules, we are a natural monopoly, and the ICT, the new technologies applied to low voltage and medium voltage. These are the two key facilitators in order to understand what's going to happen in the future from a DSO perspective. Let's try to say something about this. From rules, ACER, the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, is considering that now distributions are already behaving as systems. So the role of the DSO should evolve in one sense, in the sense of we need flexibility from distributed resources. We need to manage system services, or in other words, we need to be an active system manager. You would say, David, what is this exactly? We are engineers, so the best way to understand it is with an equation. Remember, we were saying we are not DSOs? What else is needed to be the real DSOs? System services. So we should be procuring system services, we should be procuring the flexibility delivered from these distributed energy resources, demand, generation, storage, electric vehicles. Okay? And this is what is called an active system management approach. So, okay, system services. Let's try to rethink with system services how we are going to keep the lights on. The system services, the first place, originally speaking, where you can see that this is taking place is coming from the Energy Efficient Directive. In this directive is stated that somehow network operators should be considered for procurement of system services, but for efficiency perspective purposes. This is something that has really evolved today, and system services or flexibility in general is, generally speaking, increase or decrease generational demand. That's all. Okay? And why are we going to do that? In reaction to a signal, internal or external. From where? From distributed resources. So, okay, we understand that. But what are we going to do with flexibility? Two main purposes. Portfolio optimization and system services. What is portfolio optimization? Portfolio optimization is somehow the flexibility be used for hedging or in order to minimize volatile prices, to minimize the way we are buying and selling energy. So this is a tool for retailers. This is a tool for market agents in general, because what they are trying to follow is to maximize the benefits. So maximize benefits and risk aversion, very important. But from a system service perspective, a system service is any kind of service, any kind of flexibility delivered by distributed resources in order to enhance the security supply and the quality of service. So this is a regulated business. This is part of the network operators. And in this case, the efficiency is extremely important. We are not maximizing here the benefits from anybody. Okay? These kind of types of flexibility, the first one, the first arrow, is optimization portfolio, and the two second ones are the TSO part and the DSO part. And the key reason I'm having here this table on board is in order to understand, okay, the needs are different. TSO is system-wide and the DSO is regional or local. Okay? It's very important to understand this. So, plenty of documentation about this. I do really recommend you to read all these reports For example, there are some, we were participating in these reports from Euroelectric in the way, what is an active system management approach? What about the flexibility from the decentralized storage? Also from demand? What are going to be the market arrangements in terms of flexibility? In this report also from Euroelectric. Of course, EDSO for smart grids. We have the opinion about this and flexibility in the same way, another report. GIOT, what is the association for the small DSOs in Europe, talking about flexibility. SEDC, who is the association, is the Smart Energy Demand Coalition, so the association for demand perspective. And also information in a report from NSOE. In other words, everybody's talking about this. Everybody. So, if you are going to Brussels and you say to the taxi driver flexibility, he's going to understand you. You can try to do it. But what is flexibility? From a more deeper perspective. There is quite consensus on flexibility in terms of comparison with the traffic light approach. And what does it mean? That means that if we are dividing here the graph in terms of the time scales for the DSO, long-term planning, medium-term connection and access, and short-term operation, and in the y-axis, how mature could be the flexibility. So the higher is the maturity of flexibility, the lower is going to be the red area. And the colors means that the green part. The economics, the result of markets are perfectly compatible with networks. So there is nothing to do with TSOs and DSOs. No problem at all. Go for it. The economic solution is viable. No problem. But we could find sometimes some situations where the economics, the results of markets are not compatible with networks because we have constraints. So flexibility is applying to this part. In other words, we could think about a new market for flexibility in order to make compatible for everybody, TSOs and DSOs, markets with networks. Okay? That's the place for flexibility. And the red area is when this is not compatible but somehow is improvised. We should do something in real time. There is no place for market over there because there is no time to take a decision with market arrangements. So the more flexibility we have, the less emergency actions we are going to require. So system services that somehow are going to help us to fulfill all our main processes, planning, connection and access, and operation. What are the key questions in order to understand what is going to happen? First of all, planning, firmness. The directive of the third package is saying that DSOs should consider at the planning stage the contribution of DG, distributed generation, and demand contribution. How are we going to do that? If we are seeing that the firmness delivered by a transformer is not the same that the one from a distributed resource. What are the mechanisms? What are the incentives in order to bring this on board? This is for a doctoral thesis, for a PhD, I can tell you. Something that is not answered yet. Probably the MIT students are going to consider that. In terms of connection and access, very important to balance and to understand the trade-off between connection and access. We will say something about this. And for congestion management and voltage control, it's very important flexibility in order to procure services in short term. This is typical in the TSO business, but we are going to need this in the DSO part. And as I said before, in terms of connection and access, it's very important to understand the combination of firmness. Because taking into consideration that connection is the process to bring somebody on board into the electricity system, so connect somebody. And the access is the availability once you are connected to inject or withdraw generation of demand. We could see a typical situation for non-firm connection and firm access, what is the typical situation in Europe where the feed and forget approach applies. Everything is solved at the planning stage. What's the problem of this? We are overinvesting. We see that due to the amount of power we need and the amount of capacity. Remember that 11%? So there are some countries like Germany, it's like the pendulum, where now is the only operation approach. So okay, let's try to connect everything and we will solve it at the operation stage. In Germany, you are able to make a curtailment of up to 70% of generation, typical for photovoltaics. But that's policy. We need a consensus. So the active management approach would be probably the most cost efficient for both parts. System users to be connected and transmission and distribution system operators in order to minimize costs of the system. And when we are saying that the DSO should be procuring system services, there are some voices where somehow are thinking in terms of, but what about unbundling for a DSO? Is going the DSO to be able to buy flexibility from these new markets? So if we understand the directives, today we have two typical approaches for unbundling. We have accounting, finance, functional, legal, and ownership. Accounting is having separate accounts. Okay, functional is in terms of the organization, and legal is in terms of different companies you have in the holding, in the group. And ownership is when you have a proper and suitable shareholders for only this activity. So the situation today in terms of the third package is for the DSO apply the three first ones. For the TSO, the ownership unbundling is also applicable. There is an exemption rule of the 100,000 system users for small DSOs where these rules are not applicable, and it's something very important to consider. The vision of CERT, the vision of the regulators in general, is with the full implementation of the third package, this would be enough. It's not required to go beyond that point. When we were talking to them, they are really worried today for the rebranding of DSO. It should be clear. For example, for our company, it's very clear that we are Unión Fenosa Distribución. Okay, that's the unbundling, but we are belonging to the Gas Natural Fenosa group. So branding is very important. And they were also worried about the enough resources for the DSOs and also the compliance officers. But with these three ones, the most important one is the first one. There are some other reports, like the third report from the European Commission, where they are saying that the critical area is for small DSOs. Because small DSOs in number represents the half, the 50% of the DSO business. And I wanted to bring you this picture here, because when we are analyzing unbundling for DSOs, the number of DSOs is not important. Nothing at all. And the best situation in order to analyze is Spain, because we have more than 300 DSO companies, and these 300 are only representing 1% of the distributed energy. So it's nothing related to the market. So when we're analyzing this, we have to take into consideration another aspects. And the situation across Europe is extremely diverse, because the small DSO phenomenon is quite significant in Germany, in Finland, in Sweden, in Austria, and of course in Spain, but not in terms of energy. We should analyze the percentage for every country, we are not the same. And something very important to consider, to bring you into consideration, is the ownership unbundling. There are 3 countries in Europe with ownership unbundling. It's UK, Belgium, and where is the last one? And the Netherlands. And the Netherlands. Because in the Netherlands, there are some companies that are now within a court process, because due to these countries going beyond the 3rd package, there are some companies that now they are trying to analyze this through the courts. So the Brussels court is going to decide very close the Delta case. There are plenty of information about this within the internet. I can recommend you to go through this. Data. Plenty of people are worried about this, because somehow plenty of companies are thinking that there is a business here. The purpose is the data, but data is not a purpose itself. When we are thinking about data, first of all, we need to analyze what are the different processes we have in our companies in order to analyze what kind of data we are going to need. So we are going to need data as market facilitators and as system operators. Okay? I'm not going to go in really detail in these tables. That's to put into consideration. But there are 2 very important aspects between them that are going to change somehow the DSO business. And the first one is the observability area that is required for all DSOs. This is very typical from a TSO perspective, but it's not from a DSO world. Why? Because look at this. Here you have the gray and blue area is the grid we are owning, we are responsible for. But the red one is the area we need, because it's an influence area in our network. It's another network that we need to supervise and monitorize in order to understand what is going to happen in our networks. So that's very important to bring this on board. And this situation, we could say in general in Europe, is not happening. DSOs are not having enough data to control and supervise their own networks. That's the first message. The second message is regarding smart meters. Everybody is worried about this. The European Commission is also worried about this. What I would like to introduce you today is that the smart meter is not only a device to collect the measurements of system users. It's only a sensor. In fact, there is the last sensor of the low voltage network. So that means that this device is going to give us information as system operation and as a market facilitator. If this device is not controlled by the DSOs, we will need to install some other sensors in order to do this activity. Do you think that this is efficient? So somehow, European Commission now is extremely worried about this, because there are different models about in terms of how are we going to collect the data, who is the owner of the meter, who is responsible for the management of the asset, who is responsible for planning and operating this meter, who is responsible for the data hub, that is the place where all the measurements are going to. There is a group we've been working to. It's the SGT3, the Smart Grid Task Force 3 in Europe. The first model is the DSO is taking on board all of these aspects. There is a second model where the data hub is not in hands of the DSO. And there is a third model where also the meter is not in hands of the DSO. There are different approaches today. Again, one size fits not all approach is applicable. But let me introduce you the example of Spain as a very good example, because it's a very good consensus in terms of centralized and decentralized approach. That means that DSO is taking on board the meters, the measurements, and the sensors. But it's passing through all this information to the TSO, who is the data hub for the settlement process. That's working brilliant, and this is something that we would like to carry on, and should be, why not, a model for the rest of Europe. Because we were saying that networks are behaving as systems, but the electricity system is only one. A future more cooperation approach between TSO and DSO is going to be required. We have an expert here in this room about this topic, and it's Pedro. He's working about this, TSO-DSO cooperation. Asia is taking on board that a closer cooperation is required. Equal sense in terms of information coordination and the way we are procuring system services. Because the TSO is not the unique procurer of system services. Now we need the DSO on board. There are some reports that are considering this. Very important to understand. Of course, there are plenty of alternatives. Let me bring you here this very nice and very good paper coming from this university. It's proposing two types of designs for flexibility. The first one is the DSO procuring system services and somehow canalizing these services to the TSO. Why not? Good example. Another example would be in terms of, okay, let's create a new market with an independent market operator, and the TSO and DSO will be procuring, in terms of their needs, the flexibility required in order to maximize the security supply. Another option. There are plenty of alternatives here. We are already in discussions in terms of why we are not going to merge congestion management and balancing, why we are not to have a flexibility market for short term and long term. Plenty of aspects. Balancing is a flexibility in order to increase or decrease in real time generation, or I would say in the future demand. And congestion management is increase or decrease generation to solve constraints. So my question is, if we have lemons, and lemons is increase or decrease generation, lemons are lemons, why we have two trees to pick up these lemons? This is what is happening today. If we have one product, why two markets? This is under discuss within the European perspective. We are talking about consensus, cooperation. We've made a step forward between the TSOs, ENSOI, who is the institution for TSOs, and the 4 DSO association, and we have signed a memorandum for nice cooperation between us in terms of information, operational cooperation, and reports and areas for investigation in a mutual perspective. Very important. We are making steps all the time. And we've been sitting with them in March, in April, and last Thursday and Friday discussing, okay, what are our key areas, overlapping areas that we have to bring here on board? And after analyzing the processes, the differences, we have selected 3 very important topics: flexibility, voltage control, and information exchange. So hopefully, in the next and coming months, you will see a consensus paper between TSOs and DSOs that is considering these overlapping areas between TSOs and DSOs. So, close to the end, let me talk about now ICT. Remember at the beginning we were saying rules and ICT applied to medium and low voltage. The web services and applications are changing everything today in the way the digital area is here. And we have to consider this in the electricity business, because now we are making control and supervision of a system of systems. I will show you. First of all, think first. We are talking about innovation. And in terms of distribution, we have 3 completely different parts: high voltage, medium voltage, low voltage. High voltage is the world of hundreds. Medium voltage is the world of between thousands and tens of thousands. And low voltage is the world of millions. So a cost of anything multiplied by millions or by thousands or by hundreds is not the same. So we have to think big, start small, and scale fast. That's very important. That's the best way for a cost-efficient approach. Okay? Remember, we have 10 million of kilometers of lines across Europe. So, innovation for our company, and that's a smart grid approach, is copper and iron, real-time supervision, and automation. All these 3 aspects together are what we consider innovation as a smart grid. As a copper and iron, we are really making a huge innovation in this. Look at this. This is present day substations. In only a room, half of size of this room, we are now here, we are supplying 120,000 people demand. It's quite impressive. But also, because this is not Puerto Alcalá, this is a secondary substation. And we are supplying 1,000 people. We are really distributed everywhere. We have plenty of vocations. It's not a good time to show you Santiago Bernabéu Stadium this year, but this is to show you that red lines are medium voltage lines and green ones are transmission lines. Can you notice this when you are walking at the street? So we are really integrated in our cities. Also, we are artists. We are able to have a design in terms of camouflage for our towers. And last but not least, flexibility in terms of assets. That's incredible, because we have huge amount of mobile assets in order to be in place in hours. The typical commissioning and the typical project for a new substation is from 1 year up to 3-4 years. Thanks to this flexible equipment, we are able to install this equipment in less than 1 year, in 1 year, 1 day, roughly. From a real-time supervision, remember, DSOs are supervising system of systems. Look at this. We are having in our control room center an average daily traffic of 4 million signals. 4 million. We are connecting in real time our SCADA with 140,000 RTUs, remote terminal units. We are a communication company. And we are designing in terms of the architecture of communications. The communications in terms of security, availability, and N-1 security approach. We are using carrier, optical fiber, satellite, plenty of GPRS, plenty of technologies in order to do it. So telecommunications engineers are very important in our business, more and more in the upcoming days. And these communications should be working in all time scales. Because sometimes, and this is a graph that is showing you the number of simultaneous events due to severe weather, our storms. So look at this. In 2014, we have a storm with very close figure of 1,500 simultaneous events at the same time. And a traffic incremented in only one portion of our network in a 25%. Close to 5 million signals per day working. So how are we going to decouple the electricity business from the communication world? Because if the electricity is failing, the communication should be still working. Very important, the architecture, in order to manage that. So flexibility in terms of mobile equipment is also based on communications. And that's very important for the role of the DSO. And automation. We are working in order to automatize the medium voltage and low voltage networks. What are we doing? We are integrating the information of the meters into a concentrator that is installed in our secondary substations. So we are using, again, communications within the Prime Alliance, the DLMS protocol. And we are sending this information into our central data hub using GPRS technologies. We are also installing an advanced equipment for all our secondary substations in order to increase the level of monitoring and control, everything that is happening in the network. Let me finalize. Let me try to bring you here some brains, very good brains, in terms of the incentives. Because this is a quite complex puzzle. Why? Because coherence is extremely important in our business. Why? Because when we are promoting renewables, or in general distributing resources, it's very important this energy policy that should be compatible with the gross domestic product of all the countries. Spain is one of the first countries in innovation for promoting renewables, but we are not the first in terms of the gross domestic product. So we need some coherence here. But this approach that somehow is going to give you the penetration of distributed resources, after that, we should connect all these new and coming system users. So the planning and access and connection incentives should be coherent with the system users that are coming into our grid. System users that once they are connected, we will have to operate them. Subsystem services in real time that we are going to use should be coherent with system users connected and the ones we have. And because DSOs are the ones that are doing so, the incentives for DSO should be in line with all this puzzle. And of course, considering roles and responsibilities and our purpose. So, today, the European conversations are based on, shall we continue monitoring OPEX and APEX, CAPEX and OPEX? That makes sense? Or why we are not going to give some freedom for the DSOs in order to select what is the best trade-off between CAPEX and OPEX? Are we going to still monitoring inputs, or we do believe that we should focus on outputs? Is the incentive scheme for an input-based regulation the regulation of the future? Or should be based on KPIs, key performance indexes, performance, supervision, and innovative investments for DSOs? Because what is the risk today for the DSO who is investing in telecommunications? Because for assets, there is an accounting rule of 40 years for depreciation, amortization. But what is the right figure for ICT technologies? So plenty of things should be on board here, because a smart world and a smart business should be also aligned with a smart regulatory framework approach. This is something to bring on board. So let me finalize with some key conclusions. First of all, remember that today networks are already behaving as systems. Why? Because the change of paradigm in terms of we have plenty of distributed generation is not making compatible the business as usual incentives. Also, this situation combined with the ICT new technologies for medium and low voltage should be considered for the general picture. System users are our customers. We should think about them. Very important. And remember, the diversity in Europe is huge. A one-size-fits-not-all approach should prevail in order to understand our history and the future. We are real market facilitators and system operators. We would like to be real system operators, but we are not today. So new incentives in order to bring us in this new role should be involved. Flexibility is key in order to not to connect distributed resources, also for the integration of them, and to have a more efficient system in the future, what is not the situation we are having today. Data. Data is not a business for everybody, because data is not a purpose itself. It's something that is going to help us to fulfill the processes, our core processes. And remember that the smart meter is not only a technology for the collection of the measurements, it's also a sensor. And because low voltage is the world of millions, a cost-effective approach should be in place. So at the end, incentives for DSO should be on board compared with the new and coming challenges. It's not compatible a business as usual regulation with an innovation and future approach. So we need to project that. If we want to be that, we have to imagine that we could do that. Thank you very much for your attention. It would be a pleasure from my side to answer any kind of questions if you are not asleep already. Thank you.